All right, let's get started. Good afternoon, and thank you for coming to the NBPA State of the Union Media Availability. We're here to discuss the recently completed CBA, the future business of the NBPA, and take your questions on matters pertaining to the Players Association. We're pleased to be joined here by NBPA President Chris Paul, Vice President Anthony Tolliver, Secretary-Treasurer James Jones, Executive Director Michelle Roberts, and Chief Marketing Officer Jordan Slachter. We will open up with some early remarks from Chris and Michelle.
Thank you, Darren. Good morning, everybody. Is it still morning? No.
Nope.
Sorry about that. It's been a long, already 2 days. But thanks for coming by. I'm going to be brief and then turn it over to Chris and the rest of my bosses. But I just wanted to have you feel my joy that we were able to avoid having the players locked out, avoid any work stoppage, and of course get a CBA negotiated successfully. I think it's a fabulous deal, and we're all very pleased. I just, however, want to emphasize that this was something that absolutely required the participation of the players, and to my absolute delight, there was no problem whatsoever having the players. The men seated to my left, as well as other members of our PA, be thoroughly engaged in the process of negotiating this piece. Not only did we have players appearing at meetings, but whenever we needed to consult and receive guidance from the players, there was never any difficulty getting the players engaged. No matter what the other differences are between this CBA and prior CBAs, absolutely the one principal difference with respect to this CBA is that it was a player-driven process. Players were not used as props. They were engaged in giving us direction. And so we're very pleased that we were able to put this behind us, at least for 7 years. Our next big project will be group licensing. And the reason Jordan Schlachter is here is because he is going to be leading the charge together with guidance from our bosses with respect to this new era in the history of our PA. We've taken our group licensing rights back, and we intend to control them going forward. So with that, Chris, I will turn it over to you.
Well, first and foremost, thank you guys for being here. And on behalf of the union and its players, we're excited that we've reached a deal, and more so for the fans that come out and make things like this All-Star Weekend possible. Without our fans, we would obviously be nothing. And then I also want to say a big thank you to Michelle, who is always so gracious and deflects everything, and to our union staff who put in the time, the hours, day in and day out, so that we can go out and practice and try to perfect our jobs. This was having an opportunity to be a part of the last CBA negotiations, as well as a lot of other guys on our committees. I would say this went a lot smoother. What you say, JJ?
Most definitely.
Most definitely. And I think because everyone came to the table in good faith, and we've all had experiences. All of us are a little older. And the thing that I think we're all most proud of is, to piggyback off what Michelle said, was the feedback from our players. You know, that's one thing that we talked about some years ago when we talked about taking our union back, is making sure that we got real feedback from our players. Tell us what you need, tell us what you want, and that way we can talk and communicate and figure out how to continue to grow the pie, how to continue to make the game better. And I think we had an opportunity to do that. Coming into this league, you really don't know what to expect. You don't really understand what the union is or what it does or what the NBA does, but I think we're getting a lot of feedback from our younger guys into the league, and that way we can now continue to grow the game for the future, for the present, and we're also always trying to figure out ways to impact our past players who paved the way for us, because one thing is for sure, whether you know it or not, whether you admit it, everybody always talks about father time, but one thing that's guaranteed is that all of us at some point will be a retired player. You know what I mean? I would love to play forever. Well, at least until, well, yeah. But yeah. JJ definitely trying. But it's all about the unification of our league and really showing that brotherhood and what it's all about, and we're proud about it.
Open up for questions. Please state your name and outlet before asking your question, and use the mic nearest you.
I guess it's a question for Michelle and for Chris. When you talk about the group licenses, what exactly do you mean? How do you explain that to people who are, us, reporter types?
We pay this guy big money.
Okay.
So I'm going to, with your permission, Chris, deflect that question
Absolutely.
to Jordan.
Yeah, so the group license is really the ability to use players' names, numbers, and images collectively in groups of 3 or more for products, for sponsorship, for stuff like that. For the last 20 years, we've been in the deal with the NBA where we've kind of rented those rights to them and we've shared in the revenue for it. But again, being driven by our players in their direction, they wanted to have a little bit more control, a lot more control in the process. And they wanted to be able to, whether it's a licensing deal using their names and numbers and images, or the way sponsors are using it as well, they wanted to have control in the process and be able to contribute to the process just as well. So we were able to have those rights back to us. Additionally, taking these rights back also gives us a lot more opportunity to do a lot more things with the union. When Chris said take back the union, now we're able to do a lot of things with the union because these guys represent something as members of this union, not just members of the team or the league that they play in, but as members of the union. And now for the first time, starting in July, we're going to really be able to capitalize on that opportunity.
Do you have those? Is that one of the resolutions on that? The
group licensing rights were always ours to take back. The agreement that we were under with the NBA expired at the end of this current collective bargaining agreement that we're in. So when that expires on June 30th, those rights revert back to us, and we're just not signing another agreement with the NBA.
Okay. How big of that an issue was that towards the end of the negotiations? That was what we were trying to understand. How big of an issue was that?
I think there were just some details to be worked out from the very start of the negotiating process. We knew that this was one of the reasons why I was hired. This has been a directive of the players for a long time to explore taking it back. So we'd known for the past couple of years that we were going to do it. There were just some details that had to be worked out as part of it. And the transition, frankly, is a big part of it because we're not looking to upset the apple cart or upset the existing business. The NBA is still going to be our partner in this business. We just had to work out the details. So it wasn't a major snag at all.
I guess for Chris, you guys have mentioned how important this was to kind of take over this licensing deal. What made it so important for the players that this was something that you guys really wanted to take over and not share this partnership with the league anymore?
Well, I think along with what Jordan said is that there is still a partnership there, but it's also about understanding what your value is. And I think us as players, we're a lot more educated as far as the business of the game, and we have an amazing team around us, which is why when she asked the question, Jordan answered. There's not one person up here that's tried to do any of this alone. We have an amazing executive committee as far as players, and like I said, Michelle and our team, we got feedback from the players. That was the biggest thing. This right here, unfortunately, is not set up just for this press conference. This is where we meet as players and we talk about different things that's important. And that was one of the big things that was important to the guys.
And I'll just add to that, the NBA has done a really good job of growing the game and building the game and capitalizing on player images too. We just think that there's more that can be done and more control we have in the process, and the current agreement we were under just limited that ability. So this is not to disrupt any momentum we have ongoing. It's, and like Chris said, we're still partners with the NBA in a lot of this business. Now there's just new opportunities that we get to explore.
And can I also add that the NBPA was the only players association that was not in control of its licensing, group licensing rights. So while it's new to this PA, it's always been the case. Football, baseball, hockey, they've always had that. So we're simply coming of age a little later than our sister unions had.
Steve Ashburner, NBA.com. Most fans' familiarity with the union comes during labor talks as they approach and as they're ongoing. And a lot of our work on the union is focused towards labor talks. Are there any special challenges to handling peace for the foreseeable future, as opposed to, we sort of know how both sides handle the war?
I guess I'll talk about that a little bit. Really, yeah, it is a little different ground. Normally around this time there'd be articles coming out about what's the snags, what's the holdups, or if there's even any talks at all. But the fact that we have a deal, the Players Association, we have our own challenges that, most people don't, really know about or talk about. It's just, we're always trying to engage players more to get involved with the programming, with the different stuff that we have going on, the leadership programs, the coaching programs, and all the different stuff that we offer. That's its own challenge, right? And so, getting the deal done as early as we have really just enhances our ability to focus on the core values and the core things that make the Players Association what it really is, and that's to get players developed off the court. On the court is great, but off the court as well. With all the programming and all the different stuff that we offer off the court.
Can I say one thing to go along with that too? And I think one thing that goes unnoticed at times is the sacrifices that are made by our players, whether it be the player reps, whether it be the guys on the executive committee. There are different sacrifices that are made. Sometimes you may see a player go out there and score 35, 40 points in a game on a given night, let alone that afternoon he was probably on a conference call. You know what I mean? Just trying to really figure things out, and it goes back to what we said about us, along with the owners, coming to the table in good faith, doing this early and not waiting until the last minute to where things do get kind of ugly and stuff like that at times. But the sacrifices that guys make to get on these phone calls to make sure that the game continues to go is probably a thing, like I said, that I'm most proud of, because these guys give up their time and give up their selves, and this isn't a paid position. You know what I mean? So a lot of times it's family time and stuff like that. So not just the executive committee, it may be phone calls or emails that we need reply back from our player reps all around the league. So those guys are always amazing for doing their part.
Chris, just to follow up, you sort of clarified it in a very simple way when you talked about you're all going to be retired players. But we have seen over the decades that sometimes there's been a grudging acceptance of the retired players, or almost a tug of war in terms of, well, this is our time, that was your time. And
Right.
It seems like you guys are now at a point where it's almost seamless, where there's an appreciation for those who've come before. How has that come about? Have you seen it change just in your time?
I can't speak for previous time before us, but it's something we talk about in our meetings, and that's something that I know myself I'm very conscious of, and we try to communicate about it, about not being that guy or those guys. We understand where the game is today, but it's our job in order to keep it in great shape and make sure that these younger guys coming up get a chance to enjoy more and more. It's a brotherhood, which it should be, and we're always grateful to the players that came before us. And I wish you guys could have really seen that day. I wish there would been cameras in there that day that we talked about doing this for retired players as far as the health insurance. It was really a big deal, and to see the guys in the room to say that we want to do this for the guys that came before us, it was a big deal in the way it should be. And so hopefully, when we're long gone from this game, it's guys who continue to do that after us for the guys that are coming up after them.
Michelle, what is next on the agenda? I know you mentioned the group licensing. What else do you have planned, as maybe Steve mentioned, with labor peace? And then, Chris, how much longer do you want to do this job?
Don't ask Chris that question. I'll let Chris think about this before he breaks my heart. Well, obviously, group licensing is going to take a lot of our attention, but Anthony alluded to it as well. Equally important, as far as the role of the PA, is to make sure that our players, when they leave this game, do so in a way that doesn't result in the end of their productive lives. So our player programs are critical to our helping our players make that transition. One of the things that we did negotiate through the CBA, which has not been the subject of much discussion, is that we are in the middle of preparing a transition program for our players. Unlike some of the other PAs, we don't have anything that we can extend to our players once they move from playing basketball to life without basketball. So that's a gap in our space that we need to fill. And then the other piece is that there has not been a meaningful mental wellness program. That we want to provide that as well to our players. And so we're going to be spending a lot of time just perfecting our player programs. We've created some new programs in the last 2 years. We are looking to see what else we can do to make sure that when our players leave, again, the game, that they find themselves ready for life after basketball. Now, Chris, you can break my heart.
I don't think it's a question about wanting. This position, along with all of us, is sort of a position of service, and trying to help our players in our union. And I don't know the answer to that, but without getting emotional, I know how fulfilling this role has been. Like these guys right here, we've never played on the same team, but there's a bond here that just could never be broken, just because of all the conversations and with JJ, them 18-hour meetings that we had a few years ago in New York, and the staff, the union staff, the way that we've sort of grown up together, and this position has given us an opportunity to understand and learn so much. When you come into the NBA at 19 and 20 years old, you don't understand any of this stuff. So I'm grateful for everyone within the union and the guys on the staff. Like we have actually interviewed people. You know what I mean? Like we've had real business things that have taken place, and so I wouldn't trade this experience for the world. And I don't know, Michelle might get rid of me soon.
No, if it's my decision, stay tuned.
If I could add something, it was kind of going back to your question about how we deal with labor peace. I think a lot of times the backdrop of a labor deal affords everyone the luxury of just thinking in terms of how long the labor deal lasts. If it's 7 years, if it's 10 years. Well, in that time, what does the union do? Well, the average career for a basketball player is less than 4 years. And so in between labor peace, our union is still doing the job and doing the business of preparing our players, some that will play 15 years and the others that won't, to be productive citizens, to get and maximize everything they can from this game that they're building for the next generation. And so that guided us through this whole process. It continues to guide us on a daily basis, and that's why it's important that we listen to our players and we engage with our players. We find ways to motivate our players to give more feedback, to give more of their time, so that we can build something that speaks to every guy individually, and that will allow them to take this great experience of playing professional basketball in the NBA with the select brotherhood and create something that's sustainable for them for the rest of their lives. And so when we talked about in the summer how we approach this negotiation, we approach it from the standpoint that BRI split wasn't the holy grail. That's the sexy headline, but for us, it's what can we do in these negotiations that will impact and change the lives of our players, their families, and the future generation incrementally, so that with every year, with every new influx of player reps, with new board members, we can build on something that will allow our union at the end of the day to be strong enough to manage and handle all player interest. And so group licensing was just a piece of that. We continue to talk about healthcare, which is something that every player is wary and considers, given that we put our bodies to the test every night. These are all small things that we're better equipping our union to handle and manage, so that when we get to a 7-year period or a 10-year period when a CBA needs to be negotiated, we're not just coming to the table with a bunch of disjointed groups, retired players, current players, future players, and trying to find out what it is that's most meaningful to them. We refine that process going towards CBA negotiations, so that when we engage our partner, the NBA, in a respectful, very cordial manner, we're able to get things done. And we got things done this year because our players wanted it done, and because we knew exactly what we wanted. I think it helped us be a lot more efficient and keep these things in perspective. Because at the end of the day, this game affords us all opportunity to do amazing things. Our fans allow us to make basketball the greatest sport in the world. So we just have to do our part on the backside to make sure that we give the guys who make this game the greatest game. We give them everything that they need.
Dan NBC Sports. Chris, The new veteran designated player rule is one of the bigger changes in the CBA. When you look back at your time in New Orleans, how do you think if that rule existed then, that would have affected your thoughts on staying, leaving New Orleans?
Oh, man, that was a while ago. That's a whole nother story there. That's like a 30 for 30, Doc. I'm not sure how it would have affected me playing in New Orleans. That was, man, I feel like that was a long time ago. But like we said, all these different things that are going forward is to ultimately, help the teams remain competitive, help players so they're not as constricted, that they can make decisions. But not sure how it affected that New Orleans team.
I would say, though, to piggyback, because that's something that, as players, we talk about. I think people always just assume that players want out of a market. They think a big market is always sexy and guys want out of small markets. But when you come out of college and you're playing basketball for a fan base that supports you 120%, that's there for you every night, you don't think about markets. You just think about the opportunity to win. You think about the opportunity to build something with your team and continue that. And so I think our efforts are always to try to find ways to allow guys, once they go to a place and set down roots and become parts of those communities, how do we allow them to flourish in those spaces and do both things, impact their communities, but also win games. And so that's along the lines of what guided us as far as designated maximums and cap holes and increases in salaries and increasing mid-level exceptions and exceptions of that sort, because we just want to allow our great players who are in small markets or who are changing franchises to have a real opportunity to be able to win in those places.
I got traded.
For voting, you guys kind of asked for that. It was given to you, and some of the voting is rather unusual by your brethren. How do you enhance that, improve that? Do you think that was an issue? And I also have a follow-up question about in the Charles Oakley situation. What's your thoughts on that? And how is it tough to see foreign players who might be struggling financially, trying to get jobs from owners? How do you prepare your brethren to be financially stable when their careers are over so that stuff doesn't have to occur?
Well, I'll comment on the financial issue and stuff like that. It's something that we talked about in the negotiations with the owners, because that's not something that just we want to get better with. The owners also gave us their feedback, and they want to see things get better on that end. One of the biggest things that we're still going to have conversations on is financial literacy. I know for me, coming into the NBA 19, 20 years old, out of high school, a couple years of college, no one in my family had ever experienced this type of money before in my life. My mom worked for Wachovia Bank for 27 years, right? But there's still a different type of income coming in, and I was blessed and fortunate enough to have an amazing team around me who allowed me to learn, but that's a lot to throw on young kids coming into the NBA. So our union, along with the owners, we all have to do a collective, better job with helping guys understand financial literacy and what that means, and the value of a dollar, the value of this and investing and stuff like that. So that is definitely something that is on our plate, and we all collectively have to try to do a better job.
Paul Flannery from SB Nation. Michelle, given the heightened political tensions of the world and the players' willingness to engage on a number of issues, how does the NBPA view its role in that larger conversation?
I said this a number of times. Our players don't relinquish their First Amendment rights when they become members of the league, and so we view the role of the PA as making sure that there is no effort to infringe their rights to express themselves when they deem it appropriate. I've not seen anything inappropriate come out of any of the players' mouths, and in fact, I am unbelievably proud of the willingness of so many of our players to be heard on issues that affect them. The good news is there have been no efforts to suppress expression, and I don't anticipate that there will be. But if there is, we'll be ready to push back. So, you know, I make this point as well. These are incredibly volatile political times, and I firmly anticipate that there will be additional comments made by players, and they have the right to make those comments.
If I could just follow up real quick with Chris or any of the players. The NBA is obviously a for-profit, corporation, for lack of a better phrase. And is there any kind of balance that you feel needs to be struck between, your social activism, the demands of your market, all those kinds of things? Is that something that you consider? How do you sort of view that?
I think we're all conscious. That's a part of being at the forefront and being in this industry. We are entertainment. We are a for-profit entity, and our actions, they do have ramifications. But that's the beauty of this league. When guys make a stand or they say something, they put their money where their mouth is, and they understand that. And so at all times, we're about inclusion and respect and autonomy, because that's what makes us so graceful on the court, our individualism. So we're supportive of our players, and we would never suppress or try to deny guys the opportunity to be authentic, because we all know being authentic in our business is what sells.
Monty, New York Daily. Talking about retired players, you tweeted about the South Oakland situation. Is that a situation where the Players Association can get involved and you want to get involved at all?
I did tweet because as I have been of course I love all of our teams now, but I have been a fan of the Knicks since I could spell. And I welled up when I saw what happened to Oak, so of course I was affected by that. I must say, because there are criminal charges pending, I have, because of my prior history as a defense attorney, understood that I'd take marching orders from Oakley's counsel. And so if there is a hand extended for help by him through his lawyer, then I'm happy to see if there's something I can do to help. I'm doing more praying than I am actually being pragmatic and offering help. But I don't know that a single person watched that and didn't find themselves affected, especially if you, like me, have been a fan of the Knicks and a fan of Oaks for so many, many years.
I forget the Knicks, for me, because I was at home, it was against my team, and it's just a little different because I know Oak personally, so that was real tough to watch, and to hear him say that they hope Oak was going to get some help, like he was mentally ill or something, that was tough because since I've come into the NBA and we talk about looking out for younger players and stuff like that, Oak has been a guy who is always checked on me, injury, anything like that. So to see him treated in that fashion in that arena was tough. And I think, I can speak for myself, but for other players, I'm sure it was tough.
Kind of along those
We'll take
lines,
two more questions.
There have been some guys who have said that that whole situation impacts negatively on the Knicks going forward in terms of that being a market that PR team and people want to play for. I mean, for any of you guys, do situations like that factor into decisions to potentially play for a team with kind of an overall organizational situation like that?
I think it's kind of self-evident.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of a personal thing. I think some guys, for sure it does. I mean, and some of those guys have made it known that it will affect them. Other guys, maybe not, right? That's can't really obviously put a blanket statement over all players, but me personally, playing for so many different teams like I have, there's a big difference between an organization that's ran the right way and an organization that isn't. And you notice it not only just as a person, but on the court, off the court, everything. It affects everything. So if there's discourse within an organization, that can be something that deters someone from going to that market. But I guess that's as far as I would take it.
Hi, Tim Reynolds of the AP in Miami. Chris, I know you guys are thrilled with the concessions made as far as the schedule, the changes to the schedule going forward, the longer time, hopefully that, eliminating the 4 and 5 and things of that nature. Are you hoping that that might solve some of the rest issues that fans have voiced disappointment about, I guess, in the past, like when a star player comes into their building maybe just once a year and then doesn't play because it's a back-to-back or whatever, or a guy just needs a break? Are you hoping that maybe this added time to the schedule might make some of those issues go away? And do you understand what the fans are thinking on that front?
I definitely understand. We're always trying to get feedback from our fans, what can make the game better. And one of the things that I think ultimately makes our game better is the health of our players, right? So obviously adding that rest time, limiting the 4 and 5, will hopefully, like only time will tell, that'll help with the injuries and things like that. But I think ultimately we got to figure things out, keep getting the feedback from the fans. But all in all, I think the overall health of our players is what everyone would hope, so that these players are pushing their team to the playoffs and making sure our fans are getting to see what they would like to.
Any more questions? All right, thank you guys for joining us. We'll have an opportunity for photos.